At this time, I'll afford an opportunity, if there's someone here who would like to make a statement pertinent to the operations of this board, to do so at this time, with the exception of the case before us tonight. We have a taker.
This is different from the last time I was here, standing room only.
Good evening, sir. If you would introduce yourself, name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, I'm Ken Hastings. I live at 39044 Holly Drive, Mechanicsville, 20659, and I'm with the Mason Springs Conservancy. When the Board of Appeals was included into the state statutes, the General Assembly recognized a certain amount of autonomy for local government to control their own destiny in terms of growth management, and also decided that the Board of Appeals should bring a public perspective into growth management processes. Board of Appeals is given responsibility to hear appeals of administrative decisions, special exceptions, variances, etc., in recognition that perfect laws and ordinances have never been written and probably never will. Where the laws and ordinances are ironclad, the Board of Appeals must follow them. I understand that. However, it seems clear that full compliance with the zoning ordinance in particular was never required and is rarely attained. You may remember that for Guilford, the developer actually wrote the second staff report, full of assurances they had complied with all the ordinances, but left out the major safety issues with Billingsley Road. For Washington's Discovery, staff and the developer completely ignored Hancock Run Road. You may remember that's a 12-foot wide wagon rut, essentially paved to 10 feet less than the standard for a road to serve a development like that. You just heard a special exception for a gas compressor station, and once again debated whether the Board of Appeal ruling could contradict the zoning ordinance. However, if the zoning ordinance was a perfect document covering all possible variables in land use, the compressor station would either be listed in the list of by right uses or not allowed at all, period. There would never have been a special exception. So that was the role that I saw that the Board of Appeals was required to handle in that case. In each of these examples, I believe the staff report was inadequate because the developer had too much influence on what was in the staff report. To be fair, since staff didn't have the advantage of hearing public testimony and relying on a preponderance of evidence, they may not have recognized the shortcomings of the recommended condition of approval right up front. However, in the case of Dominion, the Board of Appeals asked staff to take another look at the staff report and see if they couldn't come up with better recommendations, and they didn't do that. So I think new conditions would have added accountability to future steps. From this point on, there would be no future public involvement in that process. Whether it had been approved or denied, it didn't matter. It was over as a one-shot deal for the public. Never again would the public get to testify and see what happened administratively with the people who run PGM. New condition would have had an effect on those future processes by adding conditions that would be defensible and accountable. And hats off to the Board of Appeals for trying to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Hastings, can I ask you one follow-up question, sir?
Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Hastings, can we ask you one follow-up question?
Sure.
Because something early in your statement was news to me, so I'm curious, and I appreciate your forbearance here, but how do you know that the developer collaborated with staff to write those staff reports on the cases you mentioned? Could you elaborate on that for me?
I didn't prompt him to say this, but I am prepared to answer that question. You may remember when Guilford was first heard before the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission wasn't going to approve it. They stalled and stalled, and the chair tried his best to get him to do something. And finally, staff, in that case, it was I guess it was Steve Ball, said, well, wait a minute, before you go any further here, let us go back and look at the issues and see if we can't help fix those for you. Well, months later, that actually did happen, and there was another staff report. It said staff report at the top, and right below the staff report, it said that it was written by the developer. So it came under the auspices of a staff report, but was written by the developer. It got worse. During the Planning Commission deliberation, one of the planning commissioners asked if staff could elaborate on what was going in this report, and they said no. They didn't write it. They couldn't elaborate on it. They yielded the position where I'm sitting right now so the developer could do that. Now, this is forever kind of poison for me the view of a staff report. I know that the staff and the developer work close together. Often, the staff refers to the developer as a client, and I sort of understand that. They're paying for the services they're getting, and somebody's supposed to help them do that. But I just lost a whole lot of faith right there. So that's why, and I never got over it. As obviously, it's been a couple years, and it's still a burr in my saddle.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I also want to do one follow-up on something that you said. I want to make sure I got it right. You said that the public had one chance to provide comment, but it'll never happen again. What did you mean by that?
In the case of the Dominion process, the special exception,
Okay.
there would only be one opportunity since it was a special exception. And didn't go to the Planning Commission. That would have been another one if it had been a regular by right type of thing that ended up here on appeal. But didn't end up here on appeal. It came here because it was a special exception. And so there was only one chance for the public to testify there. I don't know if there were any other process or not, but I'm sure that the approval of the final plans and whatnot and the stormwater management, all those things would have been done administratively without any involvement from the public.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Any other